Welcome to the Bitcoin Podcast by CCN, where we discuss the latest trends, companies, and people shaping the cryptocurrency space. I'm your host, Jake Sylvester. Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the third episode of the Bitcoin Podcast. This week, we're going to discuss the price being down again, Coinbase announcing it would be exploring listing 5 new cryptocurrencies on its exchanges, a Bitcoin ETF, increasing enterprise activity, including new banking and patents, Augur's platform launch after almost 2 years of waiting, more hacks, and finally, we're going to wrap up with an interview with MakerDAO project CEO Rune Christensen. So first up, let's quickly take a look at how the market stood last week. Bitcoin was down 8%, Ethereum 10%. The entire market capitalization was down around 8% last week. Even so, analysts remain optimistic. Robinhood announced this week that it would be adding Bitcoin Cash and Litecoin to its mobile app. Robinhood already has Bitcoin and Ethereum trading on its exchanges. The move is expected to bring in significant volume for millennial investors that either no longer use Coinbase or on Robinhood and looking to get into cryptocurrencies. Robinhood already has a large user base with over 2 million active users, and despite only being 5 years old, has a valuation of over $5.6 billion. But the hordes of millennial investors Robinhood is expected to bring in isn't the only thing driving optimism in this market. The CBOE has applied this week for a Bitcoin exchange-traded fund. The ETF will hold only Bitcoin, but is expected to drive significant volume and introduce the currency to more institutional investors. The ETF wouldn't be the CBOE's first foray into cryptocurrencies, as they already have the first future exchange through partner Gemini. Gemini is the exchange run by the Winklevi twins, which earlier this year applied for the same license and was denied. It'll be interesting to see how that relationship changes and whether or not CBOE will buy their Bitcoin from Gemini over the counter or a new partner like Circle or Coinbase, who is really priming to work with institutional investors. Next up this week, Coinbase announced it would be exploring 5 new cryptocurrencies. The currencies, Cardano, Basic Attention Token, Stellar Lumens, Zcash, and 0x, all experienced significant price increases since the announcement. The biggest price increases came to Basic Attention Token and 0x, increasing 25% and 15% respectively. While holders of these tokens are no doubt happy with the price increases, not everyone is happy. Holders of Ripple, which earlier this year had been rumored to be in the running for a listing on Coinbase, are definitely mad and have even claimed that Coinbase is conspiring against them because Coinbase is a competitor. It'll be interesting to see whether or not any of these cryptocurrencies actually get listed, considering Coinbase only said that they were exploring the viability of listing them. The advancement in an ounce of actually listing the tokens comes as the first application of Coinbase's new digital asset framework and listing procedure for new tokens, which seeks to correct some of the issues earlier this year that arose when Bitcoin Cash was abruptly listed on the exchanges and the price skyrocketed. Rumors were rampant of insider trading at Coinbase, and the whole process eroded consumer trust with the company. Next up, we've been seeing a lot of enterprise activity this week, particularly out of IBM. IBM won an $800,000 contract to build a blockchain filing system for the state of Delaware. And this isn't even IBM's first contract this week. Earlier, they won a contract with Saudi Arabia to build blockchain systems for the country's capital city. This is all on top of a recent deal with the Australian government worth over $1 billion of Australian money to create blockchain systems that will be used throughout their government services. Also coming out of the enterprise sector this week, Walmart has filed a patent running Amazon-style delivery lockers on the blockchain. This patent is by no means Walmart's first in the blockchain space, with the company having previously been awarded blockchain patents relating to drones, medical records, and even electric grids. The patent is part of a larger trend among enterprises looking to use blockchain to beef up existing solutions or introduce new ones. For instance, earlier this week, Amex filed a patent for a proof of payment system. This is an interesting development because Amex has traditionally been viewed as a competing technology to Bitcoin and by extension blockchain. Nonetheless, Amex is bought in. Earlier this year, they revamped their entire reward system into a blockchain-based platform. Also jumping on the blockchain bandwagon this week was Solaris Bank. The bank announced the Blockchain Factory, which aims at creating a bridge between the technology and banking sectors. They hope this will give crypto companies better access to financial services, despite regulations. Next up this week, Augur, a platform for predictions markets where users can create markets on any events, ranging from presidential elections to soccer matches, and buy and trade shares until the game is decided, launched this week to much fanfare. The platform raised over $5.5 million, or 1,000 Bitcoin back in 2015, and has been in development for the past 2 years. Lastly this week, we're going to discuss more hacks. It feels like we've been doing this every week since this podcast started, and I don't expect to stop anytime soon. So this week, $23 million was stolen after Bancor was hacked. About $12 million of that was Ether, another $1 million was Pundix, and $10 million of that was BNT, which is the Bancor Exchange's coin. Now, it's important to note that all of the BNT was able to be recovered because the exchange froze that currency right after the exchange was hacked. However, the same cannot be said for the Ether and the Pundix, which remains missing. Also making headlines this week was a Bitcoin scam that targeted embarrassed porn viewers. The email starts by telling users that it knows their password and proceeds to solicit some amount of Bitcoin from them, from $1,900 worth of Bitcoin to $3,900 worth of Bitcoin. The scam is believed to have been run by downloading a dump of emails and passwords and sending it to everyone on that list, but no one's really sure where it came from. Phishing attacks involving Bitcoin are nothing new, but this scam is intriguing because it's a mix between a ransomware scam and a more traditional phishing scam, in that it tells users that it's going to leak information it doesn't have if Bitcoin is not received. Finally this week, Elon Musk finally tweeted about crypto, but it's not what you think. Elon Musk this week tweeted for the first time about Ethereum, and it was to complain about the Twitter spam bots everywhere. Elon Musk was so annoyed that he even reached out to Jack Dorsey personally about the issue. Finally this week, we have an interview with MakerDAO project CEO Rune Christensen. I think what MakerDAO is doing is really cool, and I haven't had too much experience with stablecoins prior to this interview, but upon hearing about them, I'm pretty intrigued. Anyway, check it out, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey, how's it going, everybody? I'm here with Rune Christensen, the CEO of the MakerDAO project. How you doing today, Rune?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about what the problem is that the MakerDAO project solves.
So the primary problem that we're tackling is the issue of stability in the blockchain space. There's all this potential and all this hope for what the future will bring with blockchain technology. But what people need to realize, and what we are increasingly providing a solution for, is that for blockchain to get to the next level, you have to ensure you can provide people with a good user experience. That means they can avoid volatility, and you can give them the kind of, this kind of experience that they're used to with everything else they do. So creating a stablecoin like we do with Maker, which is the stablecoin Dai that is worth $1, means that it's possible to create this new generation of blockchain applications where the user just feels like it's any other thing they're interacting with, and there's no There's no like strange, new coin or something they have to understand. Rather, they just use dollars or other currency just like they used to.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And you said stablecoin in there. Can you explain a little bit generally what that is?
Yes, of course. So a stablecoin really just means a cryptocurrency that has a stable price. And here, stable is typically defined as pegged to an existing national fiat currency, most commonly the US dollar. So there are actually a lot of stablecoins already. So Dai, our stablecoin, is one of them. There's also Tether, which is quite well known, and a number of others. One thing that's important to note, though, is that not all stablecoins are made the same way. In fact, there are basically three major different types of stablecoins. So the first one is something like Tether, which is also typically called an IOU. So basically, it's just it's like a trusted third party that basically holds a big bank account full of money, and then they also issue tokens, and they basically promise to uphold the link between the tokens and the underlying bank account, and basically promise to redeem the tokens at will for US dollars, for instance. And that's a great model in terms of like making clear how and why it's stable, right? Because it's very easy to understand that if there's $1 behind the token, then the dollar should be worth $1 in the market as well, right? The token should be worth $1 in the market. So like the economics is very sound, and sort of the basic stability model is very easy to understand. The big downside with this IOU model is that it's fully centralized. So in many ways, it's like taking a step back from where the blockchain world has already gotten to, right? And we're kind of like erasing the main benefits of blockchain, because if you build a decentralized application on top of a centralized stablecoin, on top of an IOU like this, right? You're sort of building on top of the third party that's holding the money rather than on the blockchain, because ultimately they are the ones who sort of decide what happens on the ledger, right? Because they hold the underlying value. So to recap, right, it's stable and it's easy to understand, but it's not decentralized and doesn't really have the characteristics of blockchain. So the other type of stablecoin that's also quite like it's well known, and it's getting very popular these days. And basically every week there's a new type of stablecoin like this popping up, and it's the uncollateralized model, also sometimes called algorithmic or circular, or there's they have many different names, and all of them have like different designs, but what they all have in common is basically that they're printing money out of nothing. And that's kind of the fundamental principle of it, is that it's like about creating money out of some code without backing it by anything, and then basically trying to convince people that the mechanics backing the coin will be enough to hold it stable, even though there's no underlying value. And the advantage of this is that it's very decentralized, but the disadvantage is that it's not really clear why it should remain stable forever, and there is basically this risk that a bank run could trigger the complete collapse of this kind of stablecoin. So the advantage is the algorithmic model is that it's very decentralized, but the disadvantage is that it's not really clear and easy to understand why it should actually stay stable and why you can trust it with your money. And then the third model, which is kind of like a middle way between these two models, is the path that we have chosen with Dai. So, and what we call it is multi-collateralized. So basically what it means is that we use many different types of collateral. So we use many different assets underneath the stablecoin. We manage these collateral assets on the blockchain in smart contracts. So we use a completely decentralized setup that isn't controlled by any custodial entity, but rather is like fully governed by the community, but ultimately in like smart contracts that actually ensure that it is fully decentralized and that there's no backdoor into the system or into to access these assets. So we have a completely decentralized infrastructure of many smart contracts that hold collateral in them, and this can be all sorts of tokens. So this could actually be this can be Ethereum, for instance, which is what we use right now in the version of Dai that's currently live. It could be Bitcoin. It could actually also be the IOU style stablecoins. So we could actually put like US dollar tokens that are backed by US dollars in the bank, for instance, into the collateral portfolio of the Dai stablecoin. But ultimately, the big advantage is that while on one hand, this model means that it's fully decentralized because it's all built on chain and with smart contracts. On the other hand, there is also that sort of underlying sound reason for why it's stable, right? Because there's real assets in there. And not only are there real assets in there, but they are managed in like a highly stable and sort of low risk way where it's very diversified which assets are used. So there'll be many different assets, and those assets will be chosen to ensure they're highly uncorrelated. So that even if there's a crash or there's like market turmoil in a particular asset class, the portfolio, like all the collateral as a whole behind Dai, will remain stable. And that means Dai is like this completely new paradigm in terms of stability on the blockchain, because we give you this like very high level of stability, and we also at the same time, guarantee that it's still decentralized. We sort of uphold the principles of blockchain and ensure that the next generation of decentralized applications built on top of the blockchains can both enjoy the freedom and the sort of the core principles of blockchain and values that it has, while at the same time also create user experience that is acceptable to end users with stability and no volatility, and just like an easier and more user-friendly approach.
Yeah, that's really crazy the way you guys are approaching it. I mean, I guess one of the biggest problems with Tether is you have all these people basically saying, come on, there's no way you have $2.3 billion in the bank right now. And then the other problem with Tether is they could do what the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank did back in the Reagan years and say, hey, we're not going to back this by gold anymore, right? But in the case of the dollar, because it's not really decentralized. So I guess what's interesting to me about your approach, too, is you're currently tracking the dollar, right?
That's correct.
So if you guys wanted to, and obviously this would be a big governance change, but would it be possible for you guys to track something like the consumer price index?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting topic, and it is actually the plan to do exactly that. But what's really important is that the reason why we chose the US dollar to start with is because that's where we see the biggest demand in the short run, right? Like there's a lot of dApps and a lot of people out there who want to use crypto but want to stay with the stability of the US dollar. And so we started off offering Dai being pegged to US dollar, and then actually the next step is that we will start offering other fiat currency as well. So not just US dollar, but also euro, yen, anything else, right? Like, because our approach really is that everyone should have, like, no matter who, like where you are or what kind of app you're interacting with, you should have a nice user experience that doesn't ask you to go change to another currency than your own or something like that, right? Everything should be as easy and user-friendly as possible. So we will make every local currency available, so all local apps can just use your local currency. And then basically, once we have achieved that, the next step is that we can actually change sort of the core central stablecoin, which is what Dai really represents in the system, into something like something truly global, like a global consumer price index. And then and then the important thing is we still want to ensure that there's a US dollar pegged stablecoin available, right? But we can then create that, like we can just create that on the same, like in the same system as we're creating all the other stablecoins that are pegged to various fiat. So that is actually our plan, to create this new global asset that gives you stability regardless of where you are in a global sense.
Yeah, that's crazy. How did you even? I mean, the idea of a stablecoin is somewhat obvious, right? You've got Bitcoin; it's got volatility of sometimes 25% per day, and you say, "Oh, how do we peg this to the dollar?" And then the obvious answer is, "Oh, we set up a reserve currency." So, how did you guys even come up with the idea of this new hybrid model between printing money out of nothing and then algorithmically stabilizing it? and the old reserve model?
Yeah. So that's a good question. And let me just briefly recap the story of stablecoins. So actually, the first ever stablecoin was actually a stablecoin of the model we use, which is a crypto collateralized stablecoin. Although it only uses a single collateral type, but it's called BitUSD, and was invented by Dan Larimer of BitShares, and was sort of one of the primary features of BitShares. BitShares being kind of like the first second generation blockchain that came before even Ethereum. And it's actually old. Like BitUSD is actually older than both Tether and Nubits, which are the other two really early stablecoins. And Maker actually, like the Maker community and the Maker founders actually came out of the early BitShares community. So at one point, there was when Ethereum became prominent, there was basically some people they moved from BitShares to various other projects, and then some of us moved to Ethereum, and we basically took the ideas of the BitShares stablecoin with us, but then improved it even further by adding, for instance, the feature of having multiple collateral types, and then also some governance features to the system. So basically, we had a really good idea that we started with, and then we improved upon that just by continuously discussing and thinking about the subject, basically. And that was 3 years ago, and now we've actually managed to finally build it, and it's ready to launch. I mean, it is already launched, right? But we are ready to launch what we call the final version, which has the full multi-collateral functionality, and really start to promote it and have it see exponential growth and just the massive scalability that the next generation of the blockchain revolution will bring in, right?
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And you guys are definitely in a position to do that. So the feedback from consumers, I guess, how has it been in terms of understanding this idea?
So the good news is that a regular Dai holder doesn't need to understand anything about how Dai works. All he needs to do is, to trust that it works, basically. So he needs to sort of get the good impression that it's actually, it's a functional stablecoin, and then it's just something you hold in your wallet and you send around, and it's worth $1, and that's all you have to worry about. And there's a more advanced layer of functionality to the system, which is when, as an advanced user, you actually utilize the system to generate Dai and put collateral in the system, and which actually creates this decentralized credit market. So this type of user is, there's a lot of them. There's right now more than $50 million in outstanding loans from this decentralized credit platform that acts as the collateral source, or the underlying source of stability for the system. And I think our user base basically represents the most technically savvy users in the entire blockchain space, because right now it is actually very difficult and complicated to wrap your head fully around exactly what's going on in the smart contracts and actually go and interact with them directly to do financial operations. But some people, everyone who's able to do that, they've just gravitated towards our ecosystem. And next step, of course, is to make it a lot easier. And we sort of have two approaches to that. The first approach is we want to make our system more accessible through our own front end. So we just make our own interfaces easy to use. And then the second approach is that we really focus a lot on integrating with third-party services and wallets and this kind of stuff, and kind of really see Maker and Dai as an underlying infrastructure that others can put into their existing system as to solve solve the issue of stability, for instance. Or maybe they want to offer the users the possibility of taking out loans on the blockchain. But it's always possible to put this into very easy to use interfaces and then present it to your end users. So we're working with a lot of different partners on this, and just in general, the stage we're at now is where we started to really focus on usability and ease of access.
And you talked a lot there about third parties and you guys becoming this infrastructure layer for the blockchain. So can you tell me a little bit more about your partnership with Tradeshift, how that came about, what is it, and where you see that going?
Yeah, so I mean, the partnership with Tradeshift is just the perfect example of how we want to see Dai and MAKER be adopted in the future as this underlying infrastructure layer for other applications to build on. And so what we're doing, and this is a brand new announcement that this is news, so it just released at the TechCrunch sessions in Zug last weekend. So MAKER and Dai are partnering to basically unlock the power of this, the next generation of blockchain applications for small businesses. So we are both projects that really want to solve problems in the real world, in particular for those who really need it, which amongst others are like small businesses who can have a lot of struggles in how they do, like how they operate in the market. And particularly one of the biggest issues is like lack of access to capital and sort of the terms they get their capital on, and then being squeezed on their payment terms. So basically they lack access to cash, the cash they need to do business, because for instance when they sell some goods to a big buyer and then they sell an invoice, typically the big buyer will wait 3 months before paying them. And during that 3-month period, they're out the money because they already sold the product, but they don't actually get paid for it until after the 3 months. And that just creates this like capital deficiency. And the solution we're offering is a blockchain-enabled marketplace that allows them to actually borrow the money they need in this 3-month period after doing a sale. And it's actually very simple. It's that they take their invoice and can sell it off, like sort of sell off the claim to the invoice to a cryptocurrency investor. The interface is designed to ensure that the small business, so like the regular user of this system who operates in Tradeshift's platform and could be a supplier to the NHS, for instance, who's just a regular business that has nothing to do with crypto. And a really crucial feature is that on their end and the way they interact with Tradeshift Cash, which is what the solution is called, to their the solution as it is marketed to the small businesses. It's entirely just like all they have to do is they click a button next to the invoice and they get the money for that invoice instantly. And that's all there is to it. They just get it sent as fiat straight to the bank account. So they don't need to interact with the blockchain. They don't need to think about stable coins or crypto or even know it exists. All they have to do is just like trust that the system works. But then on the back end, there is actually a fully decentralized and cutting edge piece of blockchain technology that powers this marketplace. So basically every time a Tradeshift Cash user finances their invoice, the system creates a token on the blockchain and it then auctions it off to investors who can bid for this token with Dai, and the token represents the claim to the invoice that this small supplier has sent to the big buyer. And then later when the big buyer actually pays out the invoice, the money then goes to Tradeshift, which then takes it and turns it into Dai and then pays out the investors in Dai. So it gives you this opportunity as an investor to use your Dai to invest in a totally new type of asset class in the crypto space, right? This like low risk and steady reward asset that where you invest in with Dai and you get Dai paid out, so you're not exposed to any crypto volatility while doing this. And yeah, you get a new type of risk exposure, a new type of return on your investment, and you also get to help small businesses get access to the liquidity they need to run their company.
Yeah, and that's definitely an interesting idea. And obviously, small business is huge, right? Especially in the cryptocurrency markets. I mean, they've been one of the earliest adopters of coin payments and stuff like that. So one more thing I was curious about was the fundraising process behind a coin like Dai, right? So obviously with the normal ICO, you could say, hey, we just made this currency. It's it's going to go up 200% in the next year. How is it different doing an ICO for, say, a stablecoin than a more traditional Ethereum type cryptocurrency?
So first of all, of course, it is. I mean, as you're sort of hinting at, right? It's of course impossible to do a regular ICO for a stablecoin. And in fact, that Maker hasn't done an ICO, not for the stablecoin Dai, and also not for the governance token Maker, which the governance token, or MKR, right, which is actually more similar to a regular coin, but still wasn't distributed in ICO because of legal concerns. But I'll talk a little bit about how Dai, the supply of Dai, is managed and how it sort of enters and exits the supply, because that's a very important and interesting question, right? So, and it basically it goes back to what I was talking about a little bit earlier about how there's simple users, regular users. The way they interact with Dai is that they buy it for $1, they hold it in their wallet, they spend it on goods, and they send it to their friend or something, right? And this whole time it's just a coin and it's just worth $1. And really all you need to do is you need to be able to buy it, and you need to be able to send it, and that's all it really does. But advanced users, they can interact with Maker, or sort of the system underlying Dai, which also is called the Dai credit system. So the smart contracts that sort of power the stability of Dai, and they can actually use the system they can use the other functionality of the system, which is the decentralized credit market. So what it means is that everyone can use Dai for stability and for sending it between their wallets to the friend zone, everyone also has free and permissionless access to use Maker to take out loans on the blockchain, as long as they collateralize those loans. So as long as they put in some collateral into the system if they want to take out a loan of Dai. And when they take out that loan of Dai, the Dai is actually created at that moment in time. So they're not borrowing the money from some other person. They're borrowing the money directly from the system that's creating the Dai at the moment you borrow it. And then, of course, what's really important is that, for instance, if you borrow $100 from the system, it's very important that the system doesn't go insolvent because of that, right? So you always have to over-collateralize. So, for instance, a user would put in, let's say, $200 worth of ETH. In fact, right now, the typical rate is that someone will put in $300 worth of ETH, and then they will borrow $100 worth of Dai, and then basically go and spend that on something. And we have a lot of, we typically use the example of the mortgage. With a mortgage, you own your house, or you want to buy a house, and you go to the bank and you say, hey, I want to borrow some money, and I'll put this house can be my security in the loan. And then you basically unlock almost all the value of the house, but still there's, you have to do a down payment yourself, of course, right? And which that down payment represents the over collateralization to ensure that the bank still has some buffer in case the value of the house falls. And then you eventually have to pay back your loan because you want to make sure you actually own your house completely and the bank doesn't have a lien on it. Because if you don't, the bank could actually potentially one day, if the price of the house falls or something, come and repossess the house. So that's kind of what's happening on the blockchain with Maker, except it's fully, it's just happening according to code, and it's fully decentralized, and it basically runs on these tokens that have their value measured through price feeds. So every time someone puts in new tokens, like to take a loan, that's how new Dai is generated and enter the supply of the economy. And the system then uses like an economic algorithm, like an economic function, to govern the balance between demand for holding Dai and then demand for borrowing Dai, ensuring that those two things are in balance, basically, and that balance is what results in the one-to-one peg with the US dollar. So, basically, how you manage the supply and demand, so the entry and exit of the stablecoin into the economy, is the key question to understanding how a stablecoin works.
Yeah, and the over collateralization example is really, I guess, new concept at least to me, in terms of traditional finance. Is that very common in traditional finance, or is that more of a new concept because of this crypto space?
Yeah, so this is a funny question, because actually there is a big misconception that over collateralization is not the case in the current financial system, and that it's a whole new thing that stablecoins are over collateralized, and that's some people even say it's like capital inefficient, for instance, if they want to use it negatively, I guess you can say. But others say that this is like an escape from fractional reserve banking, if they want to put it in a positive light. But the interesting reality is actually that over-collateralization is like a fundamental principle of finance. And for instance, banks doing fractional reserve banking, they still have all their loans are fully over-collateralized. Even this, like the reserve in fractional reserve means where they hold that collateral. So basically, reserve means collateral held with a central bank, and non-reserve means collateral held with anyone else. But for instance, I mean, if you think about a mortgage, right? Like it's never possible for you to pledge a home to the bank that's worth $1 million and then take out a loan for $2 million, right? No bank would ever accept that. And sometimes you can borrow with, for instance, unsecured loans, right? So you just borrow money without pledging any particular asset as collateral. But in this case, you actually are still collateralizing something. But what that something is basically yourself, in a sense, or rather, it's a claim. It's like the legal claim to your future income, unless you declare bankruptcy. And that legal claim to your future income is itself an asset, that has a value, and that banks can analyze and ultimately give you a loan on that doesn't result, that isn't risky for them, or that isn't like outside of the risk tolerance. So actually, the approach Dai is taking is actually very close to how existing financial models they function, which I think is a big advantage, because it makes it a lot easier to do sort of financial and economic analysis of how the system works, because you don't have to try to invent completely new paradigms around economics and game theory and what it takes to keep something stable.
Got it. So I guess in the case of the house, it's the value of the house plus, like you were saying before, the security deposit, which probably gets you pretty over collateralized if you figure the security deposit's between 5 and 15%.
Yeah, I mean, if the down payment, if let's say if you want to buy a house, right, for $1 million, and you borrow $800,000 from the bank, and you pay a down payment of $200,000 yourself, so 20%, then you have now an asset that is 120, or rather, you have sort of what we call a collateralized debt position. So like a position that both has an asset, but that asset has some debt attached to it, right? And in this case, it would be 125%. So it would be just like the collateralized debt positions in the Dai smart contracts, except that because we're using Ethereum right now, our over collateralization is typically a bit higher, right? Like it's typically 300% for ETH. But basically, it can be anything depending on what asset you're using, right? Like more stable assets, they need lower collateralization. More unstable and more volatile asset needs a higher collateralization. Basically, any asset, almost any asset, can actually be used as collateral, as long as the risk parameters, as long as the terms associated with using that asset as collateral for a loan are set based on a very sound risk assessment, right? Are set based on the reality of the characteristics of that asset. But again, that's also what the banks are currently doing. That's what every financial institution, how they basically approach loans like this, right? They analyze the risk, and then they give you terms and an interest rate and an over collateralization requirement that is relevant to the assets you're putting up.
Yeah. I guess I just never really thought about it that way in the case of a mortgage. But I could see why that's definitely a big misconception.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, and one of the reasons why there also is this. I mean, there's sort of the misconception on both sides, but in particular also in the stablecoin world. One of the reasons is also because typically the numbers and like the way things are calculated and the way the numbers are presented in stablecoin world are typically opposite from how they are in the financial world. So, for instance, when we talk about 150% collateralization in the traditional financial world, typically that would be called 66% loan to asset ratio. So it's like that means the exact same thing, but it sounds like it's a very different thing, right? But it's just because by total random chance, they were just looked at from a different perspective when they were first like thought up. And so what's interesting is that shows how the stablecoin ideas basically for like the original stablecoin design, right, with BitUSD actually evolved completely independently without really looking at how finance works. It just like was made up step by step from first principles, and curiously ended up developing exactly like with this, with the same fundamental principles as traditional finance, which of course makes sense and sort of sort of verifies and sort of supports the idea that the fundamental logic actually makes sense, right? That it does make sense to over collateralize and these kind of things, right? It's just like the logical way to do finance.
Yeah, absolutely. So my final question is, where do you see your company and Dai and MAKER being in 5 years?
Yeah, so 5 years is a long time frame.
Especially crypto.
Yeah, I mean, especially crypto, right? I think, first of all, we will be really on the forefront of regulation and like helping rewrite the financial laws and financial regulation to deal with the new reality of crypto. And I believe 5 years from now, that's when the regulators will finally sort of start moving for the second step of finalizing all the regulation that's really needed to properly deal with the new reality of crypto. And that's something that's very important to us because we're dealing with collateral and claims and like these kind of things. So we have a very important interest in ensuring that the regulation really makes sense so that we can get access to great collateral for Dai, right? Ideally, as much collateral as possible from all over the world. And the other thing is, of course, we want Dai to be really heavily adopted all over the planet, both in like a very grassroots sense, right, where it's just like, like people freely building and integrating Dai into their decentralized applications, regardless of which blockchain or which system they're building on, because one of our key goals is to ensure that Dai becomes blockchain agnostic and actually is available on every blockchain and easy to use no matter which blockchain you're building on. But also, we focus very heavily on two specific sectors. And the first one is charity and sort of the unbanked and just like the developing world. And just like this idea that there is a massive potential over the next 5 years, basically to leapfrog the people who right now have no financial infrastructure and are struggling to improve their conditions. And with proper financial infrastructure and with support, we will be able to just like significantly, both drive massive adoption and also improve their lives and really make things better, basically, and showcase of what the power of blockchain, the power of Dai, when it's used in a situation where it really makes sense. So, for instance, someone who doesn't have access to a bank account right now, but they can just have a bank in their pocket with a smartphone, use that as a savings account and for payments or for transactions to each other. The other major thing we are focusing on heavily and want to just dominate even further in the long run is the supply chain space and sort of the whole business to business universe, essentially. We really want to see Dai becoming the standardized method of settlement and payments between companies in the future, because it's just so much faster, so much cheaper, and easier to use, because in the future you'll even have every currency available, and there'll just be like all this flexibility and power available to businesses that adopt Dai. And also a particular network effects, right? Which is really what it's all about. Both with like basically everything of what we want to achieve is just like we're building the seeds now to the initial sort of skeleton of the network that we will want, the economic network we want to see rise up in the future. And once it gets going, it's just going to be, because if let's say if you're an unbanked person in some village somewhere, and other people are starting to adopt Dai as their their banking method, you are more likely to also adopt it, because it's going to be so much more convenient for you if you can send your money to them or pay them with using the same system. The same thing is true for the supply chain, the B2B space, right? Is that if other companies you're dealing with are adopting cryptocurrency and stablecoins, it's also much more convenient and more powerful for you to do it yourself. And there are also a number of other key developments we want to see. I mean, we just really want to expand upon what we started with the Tradeshift partnership, and basically start to march more towards getting deals with these well-known international companies that are actually already doing something real and have a real user base, and then we can come in and we can help them improve their services and their business with the next level of cutting-edge blockchain technology.
Yeah, it's definitely a big vision.
Yeah, I think that's necessary to succeed in the blockchain space and to succeed the current phase of the crypto bubble, essentially, right? I mean, I definitely see Maker as one of the one of the few that will survive when the big crash happens eventually, right? And the good coins and the bad coins sort of get sorted, like in the .com bubble, right? With Amazon and Google and a few others surviving and everyone else dying. And yeah, I mean that is, we're actually focused on creating real value and just establishing a long-term, powerful vision and business that is sustainable currently and going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. It was great talking to you. Great having you on. And congratulations on all the progress, the partnerships. It seems like you guys are doing really well.
Thanks so much for having me. Great talking to you.
The views and opinions expressed on this show are only those of its host and guest, and sometimes of no one at all. The Bitcoin Podcast, produced by Rockwood Audio and hosted by ccn.com. To find out more about CCN and the podcast, check us out at ccn.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at CryptoCoinNews. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to rate and subscribe.